Well, high drama at the NCLT Bengaluru bench's hearing of the case filed by a group of investors of Byju's against the founders and the management, seeking to declare them as unfit to run the company, seeking to declare that $200 million rights issue as void, and seeking the court's directions to tell the founders to be more transparent in their disclosures of financial statements and other matters to the shareholders, because the shareholders here were arguing that they've been kept in the dark. And, literally as late as December of 2023, when they tried to get information, they were responded to with nothing. Now, there was a bunch of arguments by both the sides, that is, by the group of investors who would file this petition in the NCLT, as well as from Byju's, but there's no final order that has been received from the NCLT yet. There were some interim observations that have been made that I'll take you through, and the final order in this case is only expected in the next week, or perhaps in the next 7 to 10 days or so. If you recall, recently, a group of shareholders of Byju's had called for an extraordinary general meeting where several resolutions were passed by these shareholders, including removal of Byju Ravindran as CEO, a complete revamp of the board of Byju's, and appointment of a forensic auditor to look into the affairs of the company, as well as several other matters. And this is the second step that has now been taken by the investors of Byju's against the founders. Now, essentially, the argument started with, the counsel for these group of investors, which includes Prosus, General Atlantic, Sofina, and Peak 15, along with support from the likes of Tiger Global and Owl Ventures. Now, the counsel for these group of investors had argued in court today that the only thinking and learning that Think and Learn was doing was how to bypass the laws, because they said the process with which this rights issue has been done, that itself is illegal. Now, these lawyers argued that to issue shares through this rights issue to raise capital, you first need to increase the authorized share capital of the company, for which you would have to call a general meeting of the shareholders and secure a majority 51% approval to then increase the share capital, to then allot these shares and raise the money, none of which they claimed had been done. Further, these investors also argued that they were large shareholders and collectively, with the other support of the shareholders, they represented nearly 51% of the shareholding, and yet they've not been plied with any information. During the course of the hearings, for instance, the lawyer said the big case of the Enforcement Directorate against Byju's, they heard of only when the third summon was issued to the company and they got the copy of it. They also claimed that several insolvency and bankruptcy court proceedings have been filed against Byju's, and as investors, they only heard about it in the newspapers and not from the founders themselves. So they've asked the court for now to appoint an independent observer on the board so that no decisions are taken by the current board, which largely comprises of Byju Ravindran, the founder, Divya Gokulnath, the co-founder, and Riju Ravindran, who is a director on the board and also the brother of Byju Ravindran. So they want to make sure that their investment is protected and that any decision that is taken by the board for the time being is monitored by this independent observer that is appointed by the court. Now, during the course of the arguments, again, they said for the investors, it's choosing between the devil and the deep sea, because they claimed that while Byju's is asking them to invest in the company by way of participating in its rights issue, it's very unclear where the proceeds of this issue will even go. So if on one hand they participate and the company is able to raise money, they're not sure where the money will go. But if they do not participate, their shareholding, which say is at 25%, will fall to 2.5%. So, what do they do in either of the cases? It's not a good option before the investors. They also said that, they want the shareholders to refrain, or rather the founders, that is Byju Ravindran, Divya Gokulnath, and the other board members, to refrain from selling, any shares of the company or the group companies, or filing for an IPO of their subsidiaries without the explicit approval of the shareholders. Because remember, none of the investors have a representation of the board, because these shareholders had resigned from their positions, citing differences with the founders at the time. And this happened last year itself. But Byju's has argued that the shareholders very clearly are making it obvious that the company is in need of funds. And on the other hand, they're also trying to stop the company from raising funds by trying to declare this rights issue void. So that is where the basis of the argument was. the Byju's counsel said that, all of these claims or allegations about the founders being non-transparent, the board being non-transparent, were completely unfounded. They also said that, when the company was doing well, it was valued at $22 billion. The investors were very happy and never said a thing. And now suddenly, all of the company's decisions are being termed wrong by this group of shareholders. They also said that if the companies don't, if these investors do not have confidence in the company, it's up to them to not invest through the rights issue, to not increase their shareholding. And it was logical that their shareholding will fall if they do not participate in the rights issue. So broadly, this was the set of arguments that was presented by both sides arguing for their respective sides, of course, saying on one hand the rights issue should be declared void, but here you have the company saying we're in dire need of funds, and if you stop this rights issue, it will tantamount to killing the company. And then you had the investors side responding saying, you claim to be this big $22 billion company, how will this $200 million or about 40 crore rupees kill the company? So all of this was said during the course of the hearings, but at the end of these 5 hours, essentially you did not have any final order from the NCLT. The NCLT merely said it was giving 3 days time to Byju Ravindran, to the founders, to the company Think and Learn, and to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs to file their written submissions in the matter. The court will then consider this, and over the course of the next 5 to 7 days, they will then come up with the order. So now the big question mark remains, what happens to that $200 million rights issue? Because the court has not really ruled on whether the rights issue is valid or not valid. Essentially, the court's interim orders or the final orders will decide what happens to the money. But there are certain caveats that the court had observed. For instance, the court is very clearly saying that to be able to raise this money through the rights issue, the company will have to increase its authorized share capital, for which they will have to call for an EGM and secure approval from 51% of the shareholders. So without that being done, even though the rights issue is closing tomorrow, the 28th of February, it looks unlikely that the company will be able to receive the money, let alone utilize it. But you could also say the shareholders or the group of investors that had moved the NCLT against the company have not got the relief that they had sought for in terms of a stay or an interim order from the court declaring this rights issue void. So no relief for either side really. It's time for some written submissions from various parties, and then maybe in the course of the next couple of weeks we'll hear the final ruling in the matter. You already have in the EGM the shareholders voting for the removal of the CEO Byju Ravindran, of the change in the board completely, but that is also subject to the Karnataka High Court, which is also hearing this matter, where Byju's had moved the Karnataka High Court seeking to declare the EGM itself illegal. So all of these matters are still pending. It looks like status quo for now, but of course these are interesting developments, and we'll keep you posted with the latest on this front. As of now, heated arguments in the court, in the NCLT today, in the Byju's case, but no real outcome for either of the parties. The rights issue is closing tomorrow, the 28th of February, even with the founder claiming that the rights issue has been fully subscribed to by a select group of shareholders. It is unclear if the company will be able to use this $200 million at this point of time. The company in the court now claiming that they will die if the company will be as good as dead if they're unable to use these funds, and the investors making it very clear that the process with which this rights issue is being raised itself is illegal and should be declared void. Now, of course, the final word will be with the court, so watch out for the next hearing.